Am I here, friends?
You are
Yes.
so here.
Finally. Oh, now I get to welcome everyone for real. Welcome, everyone. My name is Menachem Creditor. Welcome to A Rabbi's Heart book tour, where I am thrilled to be joined by thought leaders and friends to discuss not only the essays in my most recent book called A Rabbi's Heart, which contains writings from 2006 to 2017, but also to explore some of the themes that touched my heart, that provoked the writing itself. And so today I am thrilled to welcome my dear friend and my teacher, Daphne Lazar-Price. Daphne is, I think the biggest thing that I'll say about her resume is how dear she is to me and to my wife. But she is a hero in countless ways in the world. Daphne is the executive director of the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, JOFA. She stepped into that role after years of experience in the Jewish nonprofit world and has worked at the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism as the development director. There she engaged in program planning, management, strategic planning, alumni engagement, and development, but recognize this, it's all about justice. She's also the former North American director of the Muslim Leadership Initiative at the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. And most recently, she served as the vice president at West End Strategy Team. She is an awesome human being. She's Canadian. She is nice. And I am thrilled to welcome her to today's conversation. So Daphne, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I find bios to be, I guess a necessary evil, but I just find them like so bizarre. Like, what do you actually know about me now that I spend my professional life doing, in the justice space? But there's like so much more. Like every morning I go outside to my carport now to check on we have a magnificent little robin's nest. With 4 eggs. And, a week ago there were 2 days ago there were 3, and now there are 4, and I'm just waiting for them to hatch. And that's kind of how I start my morning every day. So, it's like other little things that, feed into who you are, not just what you do.
Well, you might then put that at the top of your bio, right? Because appreciates life and notices things. Right, should be how we describe ourselves. I think it was, good notes. I think it was David Brooks who wrote that, right, our bios, our resumes should be first defined by the epitaph we hope one day to have, right? How will we be remembered? I won't be remembered that I was the assistant rabbi here, and I hope that I'm remembered for the good things that I was and did in essential ways, which are much bigger than what we typically list. So this morning, I took my kids to school, and that is the only part of my resume that matters, really. So thank you for saying it just like that. So let me ask you this very, very broad question to get us started. We live in a world where the needs are many, and the strength that any one of us might feel to bring to the world is up and down, right, day to day. So I'm wondering, in all of those ways, and only in the ways that you would want to share, how are you?
It really is up and down every day, or like minute by minute. I have to say, in general, I can't complain. I'm tired. I think the word that was circulating from the New York Times this week was languishing, which I feel in moments, but overall, I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be healthy. I'm grateful to have wonderful children and a supportive spouse. I am grateful to have space to walk around in. I am grateful to have recovered from COVID, and overall grateful. That said, it's been a hard year, or I don't know what month we're in 2020. What is this, like the 18th month of 2020? It's been a hard year, and for, all of the big and little reasons, and, navigating raising teenagers, and navigating being home while running a national organization, and being kind to myself, and as kind to myself as I try to be to other people. So, those are but I hate to complain. So, so I like to say that overall, I live a very privileged life, and I want to nod in that direction.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
And how are you doing?
How am I doing? I want to take a page from you. I feel immensely grateful for my children. I feel immensely grateful for my supportive spouse. I feel very grateful that I get to look out the window right now and see the sky around me. I get to share time with friends and with our invisible friend, Rabbi David Paskin, who's helping us make this conversation look so pretty and work so well. And my work also, it's been interesting to see how we can use these platforms, digital and real, to help, to notice, to amplify, to emote. You know, I'm aware so much so that this bubble in which I find myself, that I grew up in, is actually an illusion. It is true that I live a privileged life that separates me from the real lived experience of so many. And it is also, all of us have these Daled Amot, these 4 cubits that we live in. Everybody, and some people don't even have that. And so I've been aware of how little I need and how that should lead me to recognize that with a modicum of strength, other people could have so much more than they do.
Yep.
And so let me explore with you just one facet of that. You know, your role, your professional role is such a fascinating one to me, and we've talked about it here and there over the years. But the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance straddles so many different facets of reality, of lived experience. Let's deal with the Orthodox one first, in the context of what in the larger world has become a transformed religious and communal experience. How does technology and orthodoxy work? What has been your experience of community during days when technology is limited by tradition on specific days?
Sure. That's actually an excellent question and excellent framing. I just want to say one more thing that you kind of reminded when you were talking about your Daled Amot. I was on a Zoom call, I don't know, last week, the week before, the weather's finally started to get nicer. And I took it outside, and the person I was talking to was like, wow, your background is so authentic looking. And I looked, but I was like, I'm outside. That's not a fake background. So, and he said, you know what, I'm so used to talking to people in Manhattan where everything is like plastered walls and, you know, fake brick this. And so, so I just want to nod that like our Daled Amot really, again, something to be grateful for. But the question of technology and community has both, you know, lifted barriers in a lot of ways, and there have been limitations. So, you know, like everybody else, we went remote. We actually had a pretty prevalent presence online before, where we, you know, we're a national organization, and so we would do things in cities and communities, but also hold webinars online. So we already had a foot in the Zoom world. And understood that. But all of a sudden, when shuls closed, you know, it was mid-March last year, and for us, it was, you know, the Bergen County Rabbinical Council that was the first to publicly say shuls are going to be closed, schools are going to be closed. You're not sitting in restaurants, all of those things that really put it in a religious framework. And we were like, oh, well, what does that mean for us? And so we dabbled in doing women-led tefillah on Rosh Chodesh, on the first of the Jewish month. And people came out in droves and from all across the country. And then we tested also doing, we actually did 2. We did one led by Gen Zers, mostly high schoolers, and another led by, you know, women from across decades of age, where we had Megillat Ruth readings that were not done on Shavuot, but also people from all over, really all over the world. We had readers from South Africa and from Europe and from across North America and Canada, and participants from all of those places also. You know, in Orthodox synagogue life, there is a mechitza, there is an actual physical barrier, and with the use of technology from Sunday morning or Saturday night until Friday afternoon, there were no barriers there. You know, the access was available to everyone. And so it really changed both how we did community and lifted, you know, for us, actual barriers of how we could engage with others. And so that was a really important and eye-opening development and kind of steps that we took. You know, it also, you didn't ask about this, but questions of mikvah took on their own life in this. And really, brought together women from all walks of mostly Orthodox life, because that's who tends to use the mikveh. But like really opened up the conversation about mikveh safety and personal use and the power of women to make their own decisions, and also the kind of lapses in alternatives to if you were not safe or were not able to access mikveh in a safe way. So, and then the question of Shabbat, really transformed for, I think, every Orthodox Jew, how they engage with Shabbat. Once you took away the synagogue experience, and people who continue to choose to pray, prayed at home, we heard anecdotally, and I don't have data, and the multiple of anecdotes is not data, but we know anecdotally that all of a sudden people realize that, oh, it's actually nice to, for spouses to daven next to each other. It's actually nice to actually relax at home, and have Shabbat at home. Oh, there went my timer. Sorry. And without having to run to shul and cater the equivalent of Thanksgiving every Shabbat. It changed. It really made home the center of the Shabbat experience, which on the one hand was a loss of that feeling of community, that Kaddish schmooze, that being in shul, the reading from the Torah and listening to the Torah being read in a kehillah. But it really changed the way that we observe Shabbat. And as shuls reopen and expand their numbers, or most shuls have reopened, but as they expand their numbers, I think that people are taking stock over, how and when they want to return.
That's fascinating. In my conversation with our friend, Rabbi Robin Fryer-Bonzen, just a couple days ago, she reflected as a non-Orthodox rabbi also some of those realities, that home became the center of people's lived religious experience. And in non-Orthodoxy, that's specifically significant, because the goal of Torah, if I could be so bold, is that Judaism and tradition should be a lived experience wherever you are, not compartmentalized to a sanctuary. And so the question then in both Orthodox and non-Orthodox settings might be, now that we found the treasure of being arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder with our spouses, which in Orthodoxy we weren't before, and in non-Orthodoxy we weren't necessarily doing that at home before, we found a wealth of experience in this awful and extraordinary time that perhaps we don't want to let go of. And it reminds me of the image of Rosie the Riveter during the time of war, where women ended up working in factories where men had worked before. The real question is, when the men returned and the world thought it was going to go back to the way things were, and in some ways tragically it did, and in some ways thankfully it didn't. Some things that changed ended up being blessings that were not foreseen or planned, and women's empowerment was a specific shift. And I don't know that we have any foresight. It's kind of hard to imagine what comes next, but I sort of wonder, in your imagination and in your home, though I don't want to obviously invade your privacy here. Zoom makes it hard not to, right? What, maybe I could ask you to be prescriptive. What shouldn't change back?
I want to take a step back for a second about what shouldn't change back, because I do want to spend a second on what happened when synagogues were allowed to reopen with limited numbers. And I know that that really, those limited numbers really only impacted Orthodox women in ways that were different than any other denomination, where, conservative synagogues and Reform temples and Reconstructionist shuls, and I like how I just used a different way to describe it.
Yeah, I did too. That was great.
But they were all comfortable with streaming, which is fine, right? That's in your halachic parameters, or how you define halacha. And for Orthodoxy, that's not the case. We don't stream on Shabbat, right? And whether synagogues stream during the week also, and what streaming meant. But when, for example, when New York State announced that they could return to in-person prayer with a maximum of 10, it meant that Orthodox shuls had decisions to make. And at the time, we advocated for, every shul is its own kind of autonomous center, but that you should include women. And in hindsight, we should have said also other marginalized populations, elderly, people with disabilities, people with pre-existing conditions that make them more at risk of when and how you open your synagogue and to who and how you decide. So, in Orthodoxy, where a minyan is a quorum of 10 males over the age of 13, and where synagogues really struggled with are we a synagogue if we can't provide this basic service of minyan? And some synagogues were able to expand their number to 13, and synagogues were very creative. So with a single policy, if I can just run through quickly, we actually saw from the extreme of we can only have 10. We actually got permission for 13, but we're only going to have males come just because we're nervous about not making minyan, to we're going to have 10 men and then save those 3 spots for women. And in particular, remember, we're in the COVID world, so people had lost loved ones from COVID and other things, and we're not able to have proper funerals and proper shiva and any of that. And so their ability to access Kaddish and a minyan, which again in Orthodoxy is different, since the minyan had to be in person, face to face, and you could not have Kaddish over Zoom. That was especially meaningful and painful for people who were not able to access Kaddish. And so that was another policy. There was a policy of first come, first serve, and it didn't matter the gender, and that was it. There was a shul also that said 10 people may be minyan, but that's not community. And until we're able to open with more expansive numbers that allows for women and people with disabilities and people who are in the midst of undergoing conversion, who also are part of the kehillah, we're not prepared to open. And so, sitting from my perspective, and with my job, it was, again, we were just advocating that it shouldn't just be the 2 people in charge, which is usually the rabbi, who's a man, and the president of the synagogue, who is 99% of the time also a man, making the decisions for everybody. That there really should have been meaningful engagement and representation from across the community, in particular, again, for us women. But if I was advocating for the same thing, I would advocate for broader representation also. And I think that how shuls came out at the outset and said, this is who's part of our priority community, I think hurt a lot of people, and gave people pause over what does it mean to be in a community if I don't count in the primary part of the kehillah.
Wow. First of all, thank you for your work, let alone the way that you describe it. It must be such a place of, I hope, creative, but definitely tension to navigate these boundaries of community and tradition, especially in these redefining moments, because who we are really does come out. It makes me think of how if people are watching any of the Marvel series on Disney Plus. I didn't mean to give a plug to them. They certainly don't need it. But Falcon and the Winter Soldier, there's this super soldier serum that made Captain America in his origin story. And the scientist says, the serum only makes you more of what you already were. And I think...
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, I think this moment has pushed us, and I don't think there's a universal experience of this year plus that we've all been through. So I wouldn't make generalizations, but I think it's possible that our true selves were revealed in many cases by this incredibly pressurized place. So thank you for sharing it exactly the way you did.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that we saw. I just want to say one more thing, not about shul, but about what brought out, what came out of people. And I just think that we saw a lot of kindness and a lot of chesed and a lot of all of a sudden it became important to check on your neighbor, who you maybe have not checked on before, and making sure that, around here, excuse me, around here we have a church that provides a food pantry that feeds now 900 cars come through every Tuesday. And it's a church endeavor, and we are a predominantly from community here, where I live in Silver Spring, and the number of the shul, my primary synagogue, we actually belong to several, but my primary synagogue has been partnering in kind of public ways of making sure that there's enough food there and volunteers to help pack the boxes. And, you know, people in the community have been like front and center. Like every Monday, there's a lineup of cars in the community who are pulling up to the church to drop off their excess groceries, or not excess in a negative way, but like people who pick up groceries and pick up an extra box of this and an extra bag of that to drop off. And similarly, I've been involved in providing a monthly food delivery to people experiencing food insecurity who work actually in the local hospital that is 2 miles away. So like in theory, even walking distance. But these are people who are on shift work and don't have access to public transportation and or can't access public transportation in easy ways in order to like, you know, meet their time off and be able to access what they need. And so we bring it to them. And there have been all kinds of like small cheseds that I think that for some people are huge miracles. And, you know, yeah, we'll see what happens after.
Wow. Well, let me, first of all, be overwhelmed by what you call small chesed, and really grateful that there are people like you, and I hope I get to be counted in this group, who are trying to do good with what we've got in these moments showing up. So I should make sure that we point to a book, and I'm really glad that we get to amplify its existence by having this conversation. Who knows? Maybe we'll celebrate it too. I'm curious because I started writing this before you and I met, and a lot of this comes from my very personal experiences, and the themes are large. Justice, Israel, American gun violence, culture, Torah, all sorts of stuff. And I'm wondering, as you read it, and I'm taking advantage of the fact that we have a strong and deep friendship. Does it feel when you read someone's, and obviously I'm talking about me, but this is meant to be a general question, when you read someone's innermost thoughts, right? Does it feel like you're reading someone else's thoughts? Or is there a way that when we share personal responses to the world, we're offering something larger than autobiography? It's a question I haven't asked anybody else. And I could have asked Robin. She and I have known each other a very long time too. But there's something interesting as a writer that I wonder about, because I can't have eyes that aren't mine.
So look, I think that it's, for the last, I don't know how many years, we live out in the open, right? Like, I've been doing so less so, I think, just out of self-preservation. But like when Facebook first came out and everybody was checking in left, right, and center, right? Did I need to know that so-and-so checked into the local gas station? No. But and I think that we've learned how to be more self, I don't want to say censoring, but like just selective about like what we share and what we don't. And so that's like one lens that I'm kind of struggling with right now. I read the book. I read it cover to cover. And I have to say also that I didn't read it chronologically. I'm actually going to share something else for a second. I grew up in a time where Holocaust survivors were like very central to our existence. Our teachers, our substitute teachers, our friends, some parents, definitely grandparents, right? Like Holocaust survivors were very integral to our existence. And there's a book written by Yafa Eliyahu called Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust that is a bunch of short stories about people who survived and miracles that they saw and tragedies that they witnessed. And I never read it chronologically. So I would just pick it up and kind of be like, oh, this is the story that I'm going to start with, and read that. And I have to say that I did the same thing with your book, where I read it and not chronologically, and I would just flip it open and be like, oh, look at that interesting story. And I actually tagged a few that I want to return to at some point. And I have to say that throughout, it felt so authentically you. And whether you still feel that way in this moment about something that you wrote in 2006, which is 15 years ago. And maybe you do and maybe you don't. And a different conversation is like, we need to give ourselves permission to change our minds without being called flip-floppers, right? Like things that felt authentic and felt real 15 years ago, with whatever experience in hindsight and changing realities, maybe not so today, but every single page that I read was so authentically you. Am I allowed to like pick on a piece that I think is like very relevant to today?
Are you allowed? I'm so now I'm really curious. Please.
So the story where you, not the story, because they're sermons, but where you served as an alternate jurist in a murder trial. I saved it. Here, yeah. It's the Broken Society, on Our Broken Society, My Broken Heart, a Rabbi on a Jury, where, you talked about the justice system, and you talked about how hard it was to be witness and all of the pain of everybody in the room. Given the incredibly heavy verdict this week on the murder of George Floyd, I just reading that and reading this, I don't know that I remember what year you wrote that, but has your perspective changed or not? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No. I appreciate your question a lot. And it was my first time spending any extended amount of time as part of the justice system. And I was an alternate, right, which means I wasn't there for the final deliberation of the jury. I was surprised that a rabbi who has been involved in social protest was accepted to be a juror in an attempted murder case. And I didn't want to get out of it. I wrote reflections every morning and then sat through the hours, and in the end was witness to the process. I never got to ask a question. What I did notice over and over, and I think I said this in the essay, was how no one in the courtroom met each other's eyes, and how the judge felt like the judge was a real educator, trying to educate the jury over what civic duty means and why we need each other. He was incredibly present with both the defendant and the prosecutor, and the procedures were meticulously followed. When I wrote this reflection, I was able to process it a little bit with a member of my synagogue who was the assistant DA in the community for that county, and he and I didn't speak when I was called to jury. He didn't speak with me until I was done with the entire thing, and we processed this, and he shared it with the judge. In the essay, I wrote how this really demonstrated for me the broken society that we live in, where a father, so the case, it's very sad. There is a child who's being bullied, who was really, really beaten. That child's father tracked down the bully who perpetrated the violence on his son and plotted to kill him, and tried, almost killed him. And we were witness to a call that the father made while being held in jail before the trial, where he said, "Now my son knows that somebody loves him." And the way that the father was demonstrating his love was by acting violently at someone else. And part of me heard that as a father who will do anything to protect my children, and also would never commit violence in that way in order to pursue justice. And I say that having not been in the situation, but I hope that would be true, God forbid. I never want harm to come to my children. I never want to know what that feels like. But when I said how this all was so wrenching for me, the judge wrote me back, and I have the letter in a special place. He said, "This wasn't the worst I've seen, even though your essay reminded me to be human as I go through this process." And your question was, do I feel the same? All of my experiences, and when I've reviewed some of these essays, I I remember what it was to be the me that I was then. All of these experiences sensitize me to the brokenness of our world, and on the one hand, break me too. On the other hand, inspire is too gentle a word. My heart pounds at these things, and witnessing the trial of George Floyd's murderer and watching so many people respond, as you said, on social media with their flippant, check-ins or reactive things, and in some ways, they're incredibly loving, thoughtful, sensitive, justice-seeking hearts. The outpouring especially from the Jewish community right now, seeing what justice means from the American Jewish scene, which almost to the one understands that this was the obvious right thing, but watching the procedure, including the defense attorney trying to contextualize murder, a murder we all witnessed in horrific detail, which itself is a problem, right? To watch over and over this terrible thing. I can't believe this term, but I've been doing some research on it, black trauma porn, where the witnessing and the watching for 9 minutes and 29 seconds in this one universally seen case over and over, and that the jury had to see it over and over, and we were watching it over and over, to be, in a family, in a community where the people I love look just like George Floyd. And I have a friend who's a pastor who writes about this publicly from Berkeley, who himself has been beaten by the police to be forced to watch this. So has my mind changed? No. My awareness, I think, has grown. My pain grows. I don't know that I'm hopeful at all about our justice system until the conviction is no longer such an exception to the rule. And I think I felt overwhelmed and helpless as the alternate on the jury. And there are pieces of that I still feel. How much change can I really make? But I'm too busy trying to be helpful and an agent for change from within to allow powerlessness to be my experience. I think it's a choice to be hopeless some other time.
It's interesting. I've actually not watched the whole video. I think exactly. I didn't have a name for it before, but say it again. The
black
pornography
trauma
of black
porn.
trauma. Yeah. Similarly, I did a talk. I guess it was over the summer. I don't remember. I've lost track of months and days and weeks. I think it was over the summer with Dr. Rivka Press-Schwartz, who's the high school principal at SAR. And she said that she went to a rally where they were on their knees for the 9 minutes. And she was like, do you know how hard it is to be on your knees like that for 9 minutes? And so, the combination of it just, I haven't been able to watch. It's just too hard. And like you said, I don't need to, the word's not profit because I'm not making any money off of this, but I can't watch it. It's literally watching somebody's life being squeezed out of them. And I can't watch it. I haven't been able to. I've seen it. It's, you can't not see it, but
Yeah, that's I think, I don't know what to think. I'm with you.
Yeah.
Someone did ask me, I'll share because it's a reflection on that one part of it, the watching or not watching it. One of my colleagues at UJA, who does incredible justice work, said, shouldn't testimony be enough? Why do we need to watch it? And I was reflecting, because you started with the reference to Yafa Eliaf's, stories from the Shoah, the witnessing by survivors is different in its intensity from reading their words, and both of those are different from the horrific videos and images from the Shoah that the Nazis were so meticulous to record.
Yeah.
And I think testimony is a big question mark when it comes to the pursuit of justice. Until I know that it's real, I might not make a just decision, but what should I be entitled to? What do I need in order to trust someone's testimony is another part of this question. And as America, I am afraid for our current answer.
As I say, as America, and as, the technology around artificial intelligence shifts, it becomes more and more challenging. And yet, when you see an injustice like that, you know that it's an injustice. It's a crime, and now it's been adjudicated as such.
Yeah. Yeah, really. I appreciate that question so much. You graced me with a blurb for this book. And you said something like, actually I have it in front of me, so let me look at the line so I don't misquote. You said, while it's true that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, when it comes to my own journey, my act of relating personal recollections and later entwining them in this collection, you said something nice about that. But it is interesting, speaking of witness, right, to witness the younger selves that we were and what we've learned along the way. I've enjoyed this. It's a most unconventional kind of book tour, not only because it's virtual, but also because I'm really not as interested in like opening up the book and looking at something there as I am looking at the person that I'm looking at. So, as you reflect, and this is something that I'm only beginning to think about. We have lived long enough to begin reflecting on what it is to live as long as we've lived. I wonder, when you look back at the you that you once were, what's something that you've learned since, as you do your own kind of growth?
I have learned not to fear failure. I have learned that, this is going to sound dark, but, when things are going bad in my life and, whatever the bad is, and it could be something as inane as whoever did the grocery shopping brought home the wrong milk, right? But sometimes those are the little things that push you over the edge, right? But then obviously much bigger things. But what I tell myself often, and your wife has heard me say this, is if nobody died, it's not the worst thing in the world. So it's both putting, things that when I want them to go a certain way, they don't go a certain way, whether it's my own personal failure or an external failure or something that feeds into something that just wasn't meant to be or allowed to happen, that it's okay. We can get up tomorrow and try again and start a different path. And so rather than be, despondent or dejected or annoyed or whatever, sometimes failure is not the end of the world. And B, it's also okay to take a break. And the word that we've heard throughout this pandemic in different cases is pivot. But just going back to the blurb, yes, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, but that's not our journey in anything short of a race, like an actual running race. And I think that I think that's okay. I think the interesting things that we find in life are in the detours that sometimes we're forced to make along the way. And that's what I've kind of, sometimes it makes me a little too laid back, but I think that it's okay. It's okay.
I love that. I don't think I would describe you as laid back. That's not you in your wonderfully storied career and your ambitious way of living. I don't think that I would describe you as laid back, my friend. Though I'm glad, because I want to take a page again from your book on this. Your book, while we're talking about this one.
But while we're talking about your book.
I think finding that moment to pause and to not do, to not create, and to not worry about which milk we didn't get, which happens in this household too. That's a graceful way of living. So I appreciate the wisdom.
Okay.
And I'm so appreciative that you have given this time. I really like talking with you. Sure.
Always. And now it's just kind of funny that the whole world is listening in.
Well, that was my goal. So I want to, as I look and laugh with you, so our friend Rabbi David Paskin, who's the genie behind all this, has an effort, an incredible business model. It's a side hustle, if I might call it. Torah tech guy. When he consulted and said, "How do you want this to be?" I said, "I want to sit with my friends and talk with them, and if anybody else is watching, wonderful. That's great." So
yes,
I'm
absolutely.
glad. Good.
I was going to say, what you should do next time is it was popular. Again, I've lost track of time, where you would have kids pass a basketball from screen to screen, and it looked like we were passing to each other. So we should have a tray of food that oh, there's my timer again. That I pick from, and then I pass it to you, and you have the identical tray that you collect, and then it looks like we're actually breaking bread together.
Let me say this: if my kids, maybe your kids too, if my kids were to watch us do that, they'd be like, "You're trying too hard." So let me do this here. This is my coffee mug, right? Queens College, where my daughter's going to be going. So I'm going to pass it to you, whatever you
but
have.
I don't have my.
Yeah. All right. Fine. Daphne Lazar-Price, you are such a precious
Rabbi
person to
Menachem
me.
Creditor.
Thank you for sharing the time.
Thank you. Good to see you.
You too. All right. Take care, everybody. See you soon.
Be well.
That was fantastic.